stating that his financial troubles were worse than the family let on. The way Celeste's eyes would dart to the brandy decanter when she thought no one was looking, suggesting that the lady of the house was developing a dependency on alcohol to cope with her life. The way young Philippe would steal glances at Lily when he thought his parents weren't watching. A look that made Violet's stomach turn with its implications. But most importantly, she began to pay attention to the family's routines, their preferences, their habits. She noticed that Grandmère Beauregard always took her medicine exactly 30 minutes before meals. She observed that Auguste had a nervous habit of checking his pocket watch precisely every 15 minutes during dinner. She saw that little Amélie always ate her vegetables first, saving her favorite parts of the meal for last. These observations, which had once been simply part of her job as a cook, now took on a different significance. She began to see the family not as her oppressors, but as a puzzle to be solved, a problem that required the right solution. It was on that third night, as she finally collapsed on her straw mattress after Octave had grudgingly declared himself marginally satisfied with her evening meal, that Violet made the decision that would seal all their fates. She would continue to serve the Beauregard family with the same skill and dedication she had always shown, but she would serve them in a way they would never forget. The plan that began to form in her mind was not born of sudden rage or desperate impulse. It was crafted with the same careful attention to detail that she brought to her finest meals, seasoned with the patient wisdom she had learned from years of observing the family's habits and preferences. She would wait for the perfect moment, and when that moment came, she would serve the Beauregard family a meal they would remember for eternity. As July blazed into existence with temperatures that seemed to melt the very air, Violet's outward behavior returned to what the family considered normal. She resumed her duties with quiet efficiency, her face a mask of proper servitude that gave no hint of the calculations taking place behind her dark eyes. To the casual observer, it appeared that Octave's punishment had achieved its intended effect. His rebellious cook had been broken and returned to her proper place in the household hierarchy. But those who knew Violet well began to notice subtle changes. Old Moses, whose decades of survival had taught him to read people like weather signs, observed that Violet's movements had acquired a different quality. Where once she had worked with the fluid grace of someone who loved her craft, now she moved with the mechanical precision of clockwork. Her famous intuition in the kitchen, the ability to taste a sauce with her eyes or know exactly when bread was ready by the sound of the oven, seemed to have sharpened into something almost supernatural. Samuel, still recovering from his beating in the slave quarters, watched Violet with growing concern during their stolen moments together. The woman he had fallen in love with had possessed a warmth that could melt butter and a laugh that could chase away the darkest sorrows. The woman who now visited him in the pre-dawn darkness seemed carved from different material entirely. Her touch was still gentle when she cleaned his wounds, but her eyes held a coldness that reminded him uncomfortably of the way snakes looked at their prey just before striking. "Violet," he whispered one morning as she prepared to return to the kitchen. "You're scaring me, girl. What's going on in that head of yours?" She paused at the door, her silhouette framed against the pale morning light filtering through the quarter's single window. When she turned back to look at him, Samuel saw something in her face that made his blood run cold. "I'm going to take care of everything," she said quietly. "You don't need to worry anymore." "What do you mean, take care of everything?" But she was already gone, leaving Samuel with the terrible certainty that the woman he loved was planning something that would destroy them all. The changes in Violet's behavior were subtle enough that the Beauregard family remained oblivious to them. If anything, they were pleased with what they saw as the positive effects of Octave's discipline. Violet's meals had always been exceptional, but now they seemed to reach new heights of culinary artistry. Her presentations became more elaborate, her flavor combinations more sophisticated, and her attention to detail almost obsessive in its perfection. What the family didn't realize was that Violet had begun conducting a different kind of research. During her daily trips to the French market, she made stops that had nothing to do with food preparation. She began visiting the herb vendors and medicine women who operated in the shadows of New Orleans' official commerce, asking questions about plants and their properties that might have seemed innocent to a casual observer but carried much darker implications. New Orleans in 1847 was a city where the boundaries between medicine and magic, between healing and harm, were often blurred. The influence of African traditions, Caribbean voodoo practices, and Native American plant knowledge had created an underground network of healers and practitioners who understood the dual nature of many natural substances. What could cure in small doses could kill in larger ones, and what could heal the body might also poison it, depending on the knowledge and intentions of the person doing the mixing. Violet's visits to these practitioners were careful and spaced far apart. She never asked direct questions, but instead engaged in seemingly casual conversations about herbs and their uses. She learned which plants could cause stomach pain that might be mistaken for food poisoning, which mushrooms could induce symptoms that resembled sudden fever, and most importantly, which combinations of natural substances could produce effects that would puzzle even experienced doctors. Her most valuable source of information came from an unlikely friendship she developed with Mama Brigitte, an elderly Creole woman who sold herbs and remedies at a stall in the deepest corner of the French market. Mama Brigitte was rumored to be over 90 years old, though her exact age was a mystery that seemed to deepen rather than resolve with time. She had been born free in Haiti before the Great Revolution, and her knowledge of plants and their properties was legendary among those who knew where to look for such wisdom. Mama Brigitte never asked why a kitchen slave was so interested in learning about the medicinal properties of various herbs and roots. Perhaps she sensed the desperation beneath Violet's careful questions, or perhaps she simply understood that knowledge was a form of power that should not be denied to those who needed it most. Whatever her reasons, she began to share information that no respectable apothecary would ever discuss with a slave. "This root here," she would say, holding up a gnarled piece of what looked like tree bark. "It good for stomach troubles in small amounts, but you use too much and it cause problems the other way. Make a person very sick, very quick." Violet absorbed this information like a sponge, filing away every detail for future reference. She learned about plants that could cause respiratory distress, herbs that could affect heart rhythm, and mushrooms that could produce neurological symptoms that might easily be mistaken for apoplexy or sudden fever. But perhaps most valuable of all, she learned about timing and dosage. Mama Brigitte explained how the human body processed different substances, how long it took for various poisons to take effect, and how to calculate dosages based on body weight and constitution. This knowledge transformed Violet's understanding of her craft. She began to see cooking not just as a way to nourish bodies, but as a means to control them. As summer progressed, Violet began conducting small experiments that went completely unnoticed by the household. She would add tiny amounts of various herbs to different dishes, carefully observing the family's reactions. A pinch of one root might cause Auguste to complain of mild indigestion. A small amount of another herb might make young Philippe feel slightly nauseous after dinner. These experiments taught her about individual tolerances, sensitivities, and reactions that would prove crucial to her ultimate plan. The family, of course, attributed any minor digestive issues to the heat and humidity of the Louisiana summer. When Celeste complained of occasional stomach upset, Dr. Thibodeau prescribed a mild tonic and advised her to avoid rich foods during the hottest part of the day. When little Amélie seemed listless after a few meals, it was chalked up to the natural effects of the oppressive heat on a child's constitution. Meanwhile, Violet's relationship with the other slaves began to change in ways that reflected her growing isolation and single-minded focus. She had always been somewhat apart from the rest of the household staff due to her demanding position and long hours, but now she began to withdraw even from those few friendships that had sustained her through the darkest periods of her servitude. Lily, who had often sought Violet's advice and comfort during her most difficult moments, found her approaches met with polite but distant responses. Old Moses, who had served as something of a father figure to Violet since her mother's death, noticed that their conversations became increasingly superficial and brief. Even Thomas, Samuel's father, began to feel uncomfortable around Violet, sensing something in her demeanor that reminded him of dangerous dogs he had known, quiet and controlled on the